Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're journeying deep into our past, far beyond recorded history. We're going back to a time long before civilizations, before sprawling cities, and even before the first word was ever written down. We're exploring a moment so fundamental, so transformative, that it forever altered the course of human destiny. Imagine a world without farms, without permanent homes, a world where survival was a daily, relentless struggle. Our ancestors, small bands of hunter-gatherers, roamed vast, untamed landscapes. They were intelligent, resourceful, and deeply connected to their environment, but they were also vulnerable, subject to the whims of nature, the changing seasons, and the constant threat of predators. For hundreds of thousands of years, this was the human story. But then something shifted. Something happened that set us on a completely new path, a path that would eventually lead to the world we know today. Early humans discovered something so simple, yet so profoundly powerful, that it set us apart from every other creature on Earth. It wasn't a tool made of stone, nor was it the discovery of fire, as monumental as that was. This was something different. It was a conceptual leap, an idea that took root and grew into the very foundation of society. But what pushed them to take that first, uncertain step? What was the catalyst for this incredible change, and why did it matter so much? The answer lies in a turning point that shaped everything we are today, from the food we eat to the very structure of our lives. Let's strip away the complexities of modern life and look at the core challenge our ancestors faced: securing food. For millennia, humanity lived a nomadic lifestyle. We followed the herds, we moved with the seasons, gathering wild plants, nuts and berries. It was a life of constant motion, dictated by the availability of resources. A good hunt meant a feast, a failed one meant hunger. This precarious existence is what anthropologists call a hunter-gatherer society. This way of life required an incredible depth of knowledge. Our ancestors were expert botanists, zoologists, and navigators. They knew which plants were edible and which were poisonous. They understood animal behavior, migration patterns, and the subtle signs of a changing season. Their world was rich with oral traditions, stories, and knowledge passed down through generations. But it was also a world with a ceiling. The population of a hunter-gatherer group was limited by how much food they could find in a given area. They couldn't stay in one place for too long because they would eventually exhaust the local resources. They carried everything they owned on their backs. This constant movement made it difficult to accumulate possessions, build permanent structures, or support a large population. For an incredibly long time, this was the only way. Then, roughly 12,000 years ago, in different parts of the world, a radical new idea began to emerge. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, gradual process, likely born from observation and accident. Perhaps a handful of seeds were spilled near a campsite. When the group returned to the same spot months later, they found new plants growing, ready to be harvested. This, right here, is the turning point. The simple realization that you don't just have to find food, you can create it. This is the dawn of agriculture. The shift from hunting and gathering to farming was arguably the single most important event in human history. It's known as the Neolithic Revolution, and it wasn't just a change in how we got our calories, it was a revolution in how we lived, thought, and organized ourselves. Think about the implications. For the first time, humans could control their food supply. They could select the best seeds from the strongest plants and cultivate them intentionally. They could domesticate animals, not just for meat, but for milk, wool, and labor. This newfound stability was a game changer. Instead of constantly searching for food, people could produce a surplus. They could grow more than they needed for immediate survival. This surplus was the key that unlocked everything else. With a reliable food source, people no longer had to move. They could settle down in one place. This led to the first permanent villages. Can you imagine the profound psychological shift? The concept of home as a fixed place was born. People began to build sturdier houses from mud, wood, and stone. They started to invest in their surroundings, digging irrigation canals to water their crops and building walls to protect their communities and their precious food stores. Life in these early agricultural settlements was completely different. The daily rhythm was no longer about the hunt. It was about the seasons of planting and harvesting. The community became the central unit of human life in a new way. People had to cooperate to manage the fields, maintain the irrigation systems, and defend the village. This created new social structures and new challenges. With a food surplus, not everyone had to be a farmer. This is a crucial development. For the first time in history, human society could afford specialization. Some people could focus on becoming better tool makers, creating stronger plows and sharper sickles. Others could become potters, creating vessels to store grain and water. Others became weavers, turning wool and flax into clothing. We see the emergence of artisans, builders, and craftspeople. This division of labor made society more complex and more efficient. It also led to trade and commerce. A village that was good at growing wheat could trade its surplus with a neighboring village that was good at raising goats. This exchange of goods also meant an exchange of ideas, technologies, and cultures. The world began to shrink and human societies became more interconnected. But this new way of life also brought new problems. Living in close quarters with domesticated animals and larger groups of people led to new diseases. A failed harvest due to drought or pests could mean starvation for an entire village. The concept of ownership also became much more important. Who owned the land? Who owned the surplus grain? This inevitably led to social stratification. Some individuals or families, perhaps those who controlled the best land or the largest food stores, became more powerful than others. We begin to see the first signs of hierarchy, of leaders and followers, of the wealthy and the poor. Conflict also changed. In a hunter-gatherer society, disputes could often be resolved by one group simply moving away. But now, with permanent settlements and valuable land to protect, that was no longer an option. Defense became a major concern, and organized warfare, sadly, became a part of the human experience. Despite these challenges, the agricultural revolution was an unstoppable force. The ability to produce a food surplus allowed for something unprecedented: population growth. Farming could support far more people in a smaller area than hunting and gathering ever could. Villages grew into towns, and towns grew into the world's first cities. And with cities came the final pieces of the puzzle that define civilization as we know it. The need to keep track of stored grain, to record trade transactions, and to manage a complex society led to the invention of another revolutionary technology: writing. The first written scripts, like cuneiform in Mesopotamia, weren't used to write poetry or history. They were used for accounting. They were ledgers, recording who owned what. From there, the dominoes fell quickly. Centralized governments emerged to manage the growing populations and complex economies. Formal laws were created to regulate social behavior. Monumental architecture, like temples and pyramids, was constructed, showcasing the power of the state and the skill of its specialized laborers. Science, mathematics, and astronomy flourished, born from the practical needs of predicting seasons, measuring land, and building great structures. All of this, our cities, our governments, our writing, our technology, the very screen you're watching this on, can be traced back to that single monumental shift. It all started when our ancestors looked at a wild stalk of wheat or a patch of yams and didn't just see a meal for today, but saw the potential for 1,000 meals tomorrow. They made the leap from being passive participants in the ecosystem to actively shaping it to meet their needs. It's a story of incredible ingenuity and foresight, but it's also a story with a complex legacy. The agricultural revolution set us on the path to modernity, but it also introduced inequality, warfare, and new forms of disease. It tied us to the land and created a dependence on a handful of crops, a vulnerability we still grapple with today in the face of climate change. So the next time you walk through a grocery store, surrounded by an abundance our ancestors could never have dreamed of, take a moment. Remember that this world was built on a simple revolutionary idea that took root some 12,000 years ago. The decision to plant a seed was the decision that changed everything. For decades, the story of our species seemed simple. We, Homo sapiens, arose in Africa, and then, in a single epic migration about 60,000 years ago, we left our cradle and conquered the world. It's a story you've probably heard, a story that was, for a long time, the bedrock of human prehistory. But what if I told you that story is wrong? That the grand exodus we all know was not the first attempt, but just the one that finally succeeded? Imagine this. Long before that successful journey, other groups of modern humans, people just like us, looked out from Africa and decided to leave. They ventured into the vast, unknown landscapes of the Middle East and beyond. We're not talking about a small, insignificant event. We found their fossils, their tools, their footprints frozen in time. In Israel, we have bones from Mislia Cave, dated to a staggering 180,000 or 200,000 years ago. In Saudi Arabia, at Al-Wusta, a single human fingerbone was found, dating back 90,000 years, alongside tools in a landscape that was once a lush green grassland dotted with freshwater lakes. In China, teeth from Fuyan Cave suggest humans were there over 80,000 years ago. These weren't our distant cousins like Neanderthals. These were us. They were pioneers, the first wave of human explorers. They made it thousands of miles from their African homeland, adapting to new environments, hunting new prey, and gazing up at the same stars we see today. They were on the cusp of populating the entire planet. But then, they vanished. The trail goes cold. Genetically, modern populations outside of Africa trace their ancestry back to that later migration, around 60,000 years ago, not these earlier adventurers. It's a ghost story written in our own DNA. These early groups didn't leave any lasting descendants. They were a dead end, a forgotten chapter in the human saga. This raises a monumental question. Why did they fail? Why did these brave, intelligent people, who were anatomically identical to us, falter and disappear, while our more recent ancestors thrived? What was the secret ingredient that made the second attempt a world-changing success, and the first a tragic failure? The answer is a complex puzzle, and solving it forces us to rethink everything we thought we knew about what it means to be human and what it truly takes to survive. Let's start by looking at the world these early pioneers stepped into. Over 100,000 years ago, the planet was a very different place. It was locked in the grip of the Ice Age, but with dramatic swings in climate. During what are called interglacial periods, the world would warm up significantly. The Sahara Desert, which we think of as an impassable barrier, would transform. Monsoon rains would push north, turning vast stretches of sand into sprawling savannas with rivers and lakes. These green Sahara events acted like a pump, creating temporary corridors out of Africa. It was during these windows of opportunity that the first explorers likely made their move. They weren't trekking across a barren wasteland. They were following familiar, resource-rich environments. The problem was, these green corridors were temporary. The climate is a fickle beast. After a few thousand years, the rains would retreat and the desert would reclaim the land. The gate would slam shut. Imagine being part of a small group that had settled in what is now Saudi Arabia. For generations, your people lived well. But slowly, the rivers dry up. The herds of gazelle move on. The green paradise that drew your ancestors in becomes a hostile desert once more. You are cut off. The connection back to the larger human population in Africa is severed. Your small, isolated group is now on its own, facing a climate that is turning against you. This climate trap is one of the leading theories for their disappearance. These small populations, perhaps numbering only in the hundreds or a few thousand, would have been incredibly vulnerable. A single prolonged drought, a new disease, or just a few bad hunting seasons could have been enough to push them over the brink. Without reinforcements or new genes from the African heartland, their fate was sealed. But climate might not be the whole story. Remember, these pioneers weren't venturing into an empty world. Eurasia was already home to other human species, most notably the Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, and the enigmatic Denisovans in the East. These were not primitive brutes. Neanderthals were intelligent, incredibly strong, and had been adapting to the harsh, cold climates of Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years. They were the established locals. When these first small bands of Homo sapiens arrived, they would have been the outsiders, the newcomers. They may have had to compete directly with Neanderthals for the best caves, the best hunting grounds, and the best resources. While we have evidence that Homo sapiens and Neanderthals did interbreed later on, these initial interactions might have been more competitive than cooperative. The Neanderthals, being better adapted to the local environment and diseases, and likely present in greater numbers, may have simply outcompeted, absorbed, or even driven out these early sapiens groups. Our ancestors might have been pioneers, but they were intruding on someone else's turf, and they may have lost that initial confrontation. So we have a perfect storm, a fluctuating climate that isolates small groups, and competition from established, well-adapted native populations. This combination could easily explain why those first brave forays out of Africa ultimately withered on the vine. It seems that simply having a modern human body and brain wasn't enough. Something else was needed. So what changed? What was the game changer that allowed the migration around 60,000 years ago to succeed so spectacularly? The answer might not be in our bones, but in our minds, and more specifically, in our culture. Archaeologists have noticed a significant shift in the complexity and sophistication of human behavior around 70,000 to 50,000 years ago, just before that successful migration. This isn't about brain size. Our brains were already the same size they are today. This was a software update, not a hardware change. We see the emergence of more complex tools, like finely crafted bone points and harpoons. We see the first definitive evidence of art and symbolism, engraved ochre, shell beads, and ostrich eggshell containers decorated with patterns. These aren't just trinkets. Shell beads, for example, found hundreds of miles from the coast, tell us something profound. They signal the existence of long-distance trade networks. They suggest a shared identity, a way of saying, "I am one of you," to people you've never met. This is the birth of large-scale social networks. Instead of living in small, isolated bands, humans were starting to form wider alliances, creating a social safety net that stretched across the landscape. Think about what this means. If your local group is suffering from a drought, you can now call on allies 100 miles away for help. If you have a new idea, a new way to hunt or make a tool, it can spread rapidly through this network. This ability to share information and resources on a massive scale is a uniquely human superpower. It makes the entire population more resilient, more adaptable, and more innovative. This cultural revolution may have been the key. When the next wave of humans left Africa around 60,000 years ago, they weren't just physically modern, they were behaviorally modern. They came armed not just with spears, but with social networks. They were connected. When they encountered challenges, a changing climate, a new disease, a rival group, they had a vast web of support and collective knowledge to draw upon. They were no longer small, fragile bands, but a resilient, interconnected superorganism. This new social and cultural toolkit allowed them to adapt more quickly, to out-innovate their competitors, and to sustain their populations even in harsh conditions. They could maintain larger populations, which are less susceptible to being wiped out by chance events. This may be why they were able to not only survive, but thrive, eventually spreading to every corner of the planet and, in the process, replacing all other human forms. So, the story of our journey is not a simple single march to glory. It's a story of trial and error, of forgotten failures and hard-won success. Those first pioneers who left Africa over 100,000 years ago were not lesser than us. They were just as brave, just as intelligent. But they were perhaps missing one crucial element: the power of a deeply connected, symbolic culture that could bind thousands of individuals together. Their story is a humbling reminder that our greatest strength isn't just our individual cleverness, but our ability to cooperate and connect on a scale that no other species has ever achieved. They were the tragic first draft of our global story, and their failure paved the way for our ultimate success. Why do we walk on two legs? It seems like a simple question, right? But look around the animal kingdom. Our closest relatives, chimpanzees and gorillas, are still knuckle-walking on all fours. So what happened? Why did our ancestors, millions of years ago, decide to stand up and take a path so radically different from every other primate? What incredible evolutionary pressure, what unique environmental challenge pushed us to leave the ground and reach for the sky? The story of how we became bipedal is the story of what it means to be human. It's a journey that stretches back millions of years, across changing landscapes and desperate struggles for survival. Unraveling this mystery doesn't just tell us how we walk, it reveals why we are who we are today. Let's travel back in time, about 6 to 7 million years ago, to the vast plains of Africa. The world was changing. The dense, continuous forests our primate ancestors called home were beginning to shrink, breaking up into scattered patches of woodland separated by wide-open grasslands. This new environment, the savanna, presented a whole new set of rules for survival. Food wasn't just a short swing away anymore. Resources were spread out, and getting from one patch of trees to another meant crossing dangerous open terrain. This is where scientists believe the first sparks of bipedalism began to ignite. One of the most famous theories is the savanna hypothesis. Imagine our early ancestors peering over tall grasses. On all fours, your view is limited. You're vulnerable. Predators could be lurking just out of sight, but by standing up even for a moment, your world expands. You can spot danger from farther away. You can see distant fruit trees or water sources. Standing tall wasn't just a new posture, it was a survival superpower. It was an early warning system and a GPS all rolled into one. Those who could stand longer and see farther were more likely to find food, avoid becoming food, and live to pass on their genes. It was a classic case of natural selection at work, where a simple change in posture offered a massive advantage in a new and challenging world. But seeing farther wasn't the only benefit. Let's talk about efficiency. You might think walking on two legs is tiring, but over long distances, it's a game changer. Try walking on all fours for a few minutes. You'll get exhausted pretty quickly. Our bodies are beautifully designed for endurance walking. The unique structure of our hips, our long legs, and our arched feet act like springs, conserving energy with every step. For our ancestors who had to travel miles each day to forage for food, this energy efficiency was crucial. A chimpanzee, using its knuckle-walking gait, uses far more energy to cover the same distance. In a world where every calorie counted, being an efficient traveler meant the difference between thriving and starving. Walking upright turned our ancestors into the ultimate long-distance explorers of their time. And here's another brilliant advantage of standing up. It frees up your hands. This is huge. When you're not using your hands for locomotion, they can be used for, well, everything else. Suddenly, our ancestors could carry food back to their families, allowing them to share resources and strengthen social bonds. They could carry infants, keeping them safe while moving across open ground. And most importantly, they could carry tools and weapons. The ability to hold a stick for defense or a stone to crack open a nut was a revolutionary leap. The hands, freed from the burden of walking, became instruments of creation and innovation. This single change paved the way for the development of complex tool use, which in turn drove the expansion of our brains. Walking upright didn't just change our bodies, it unlocked the potential of our minds. There's also the fascinating idea of thermoregulation, a fancy word for controlling body temperature. Africa's savanna is hot. An animal on all fours exposes a large surface area of its back to the direct, blistering overhead sun. But stand up and you immediately reduce the amount of your body that's getting blasted by solar radiation. At the same time, you lift your torso higher off the hot ground and into cooler, breezier air. This upright posture acted as a natural cooling system. It allowed our ancestors to stay active during the hottest parts of the day, giving them a competitive edge over other animals that had to rest in the shade. It meant more time for foraging, more time for exploring, and more time for social interaction. So we have all these amazing theories, seeing over tall grass, saving energy, freeing the hands, and staying cool. But which one is it? The truth is, it's probably not just one single thing. It's more likely a combination of all these factors, a perfect storm of evolutionary pressures that all pointed in one direction, up. Each small advantage reinforced the others. Being able to see farther made long-distance travel safer, which was made more efficient by our bipedal gait, which in turn freed the hands to carry the food you found, all while staying cooler and more active. It was a feedback loop of success. The fossil record tells this story in stunning detail. We have fossils like Lucy, the famous Australopithecus afarensis, who lived over 3 million years ago. Her skeleton is a beautiful mosaic of old and new. She had long arms and curved fingers, suggesting she was still comfortable in the trees. But her pelvis and leg bones are unmistakably adapted for walking upright. She was a transitional creature, a bridge between two worlds. Fossils like Lucy show us that the shift to bipedalism wasn't an overnight event. It was a slow, gradual process that unfolded over millions of years, with each generation becoming slightly more adapted to life on 2 feet. We can even see the evidence in fossilized footprints, like the Laetoli footprints in Tanzania. Preserved in volcanic ash from 3.6 million years ago, they show 2 or 3 early humans walking side by side, with a gait remarkably similar to our own. It's a snapshot in time, a ghostly echo of our ancestors taking their first confident steps into a new future. But this transition came with a cost. Our upright posture puts immense pressure on our spines, leading to the back pain many of us experience today. Our narrow pelvis, adapted for efficient walking, makes childbirth significantly more difficult and dangerous than it is for our primate cousins. We also became slower sprinters. A chimpanzee can easily outrun a human over a short distance. We traded explosive speed for incredible endurance. These trade-offs are a hallmark of evolution. There's no such thing as a perfect design, only a design that is good enough to survive and reproduce in a specific environment. Our aches and pains are a living testament to this ancient compromise our ancestors made millions of years ago. So when you stand up and walk across a room, you're not just moving from point A to point B. You're participating in a legacy that is millions of years old. You are reenacting the single most important moment in our lineage, the moment our ancestors stood up and separated themselves from the rest of the animal kingdom. This one adaptation set in motion a chain of events that led to bigger brains, complex tools, language, society, and ultimately, everything we call human civilization. It all started with that simple revolutionary act of standing tall. Ever wondered why we share our food? It seems so natural now, doesn't it? Gathering around a table, passing plates, making sure everyone has enough. But rewind the clock, way back, long before kitchens, long before supermarkets, even long before dinner tables were a thing. For our earliest ancestors, the world was a very different place. Survival was a daily struggle, and food was the ultimate prize. Finding enough to eat was a full-time job, fraught with danger and uncertainty. In that harsh reality, a single question loomed large. Why share at all? Think about it. When every calorie counts, when your next meal could be days away, giving away even a small portion of your hard-won food could be a death sentence. It seems counterintuitive, even reckless. In a me-first world where instincts screamed to hoard every last scrap, sharing could have been unthinkable. And for a long time, it probably was. Early hominins likely operated on a simple principle. You eat what you find. If you were lucky enough to hunt down a small animal or find a bush full of berries, that was your meal, and yours alone. Yet, somewhere in the vast expanse of our prehistoric past, something profound began to shift. A new behavior started to emerge, one that would fundamentally alter the course of human history. Our ancestors began to share. They started to divide their kills, to trade their gathered foods, and most importantly, to trust each other with their most valuable resource. This wasn't just a minor tweak in behavior, it was a revolutionary leap. This decision to share, to cooperate instead of competing over every meal, might just be the most important one we ever made. Scientists now believe this wasn't just about changing our eating habits. It was about changing who we were. This pivotal moment may have laid the foundation for everything we consider human. So what triggered this incredible change? The answer isn't simple, but a leading theory points to a major shift in our diet. We started eating more meat. Hunting large game was a game changer, literally. A single mammoth or giant bison could provide a massive windfall of calories, far more than one individual or even a small family could eat before it spoiled. Suddenly the problem wasn't scarcity, but surplus. Hoarding a whole mammoth was pointless. This created a new kind of logic. If I share my mammoth with you today when I have plenty, you're more likely to share your successful hunt with me next week when my luck runs out. This is what anthropologists call reciprocal altruism, a sophisticated insurance policy against starvation. It's the ancient version of, I'll scratch your back if you'll scratch mine. Sharing became a smart, strategic investment in the future. It wasn't just about generosity, it was about survival. This system fostered interdependence. Your survival was now linked to my survival, and the group's success became paramount. The best hunters weren't just feeding themselves, they were provisioning the entire community. And in return, they gained status, respect, and the security of knowing that others would provide for them and their families in times of need. This new cooperative food strategy had ripple effects that spread through every aspect of early human society. It required new skills. Communication became more complex. We had to coordinate hunts, negotiate shares, and keep track of who owed what to whom. This social accounting may have been a powerful driver for the evolution of language. We needed words to plan, to promise, to praise, and to complain. The act of sharing food became a social event, a time for bonding and reinforcing community ties. Think of the scene, a successful hunt, the group gathered around a fire, the food being divided and cooked. This wasn't just a meal, it was the birth of the social gathering. It was here that stories were told, knowledge was passed down, and alliances were forged. The campfire became our first living room, and the shared meal was the main event. This process of coming together over food created a powerful sense of belonging, a collective identity. We were no longer just a collection of individuals. We were a tribe, a community, bound by mutual obligation and shared experience. This shift also had a profound impact on the structure of our families and the roles within them. With reliable food sharing, a division of labor could become more specialized. Some could focus on hunting, others on gathering plants, and some on tool making or childcare. This specialization made the group as a whole far more efficient and resilient. It allowed for the support of new mothers and their vulnerable infants, ensuring that the next generation had a better chance of survival. The concept of a home base, a safe place where food was brought back and shared, became central to human life. This is the ancient origin of the family dinner. It's where we learned to care for each other, not just out of instinct, but out of a structured social contract. This web of reciprocity, trust, and cooperation is what allowed us to thrive while other hominin species died out. It gave us the flexibility to adapt to new environments, to survive ice ages, and to spread across the entire globe. Our ability to share food was our superpower. It allowed us to build larger, more complex social networks than any other primate. While chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, do share food on occasion, it's often a tense, competitive process. Human food sharing is on a completely different level, built on a foundation of trust that extends beyond immediate kin. This deep-seated history is still with us today, woven into the fabric of our cultures. Every time we host a dinner party, bring a casserole to a new neighbor, or celebrate a holiday with a feast, we are reenacting this ancient ritual. Food is love. Food is community. Food is how we build and maintain our most important relationships. From a simple potluck to a grand state banquet, the act of sharing a meal is a universal symbol of peace, friendship, and alliance. It's how we turn strangers into friends and friends into family. When we break bread with someone, we are subconsciously saying, "I trust you. You are part of my group. We are in this together." Conversely, refusing to share food or eat with someone is one of the most powerful social insults. It signifies exclusion and distrust. This is why eating alone can sometimes feel so isolating. It runs counter to the deeply ingrained social programming that has defined us for hundreds of thousands of years. Our brains are literally wired to find pleasure and comfort in communal eating. So the next time you sit down for a meal with friends or family, take a moment to appreciate the incredible journey that brought that food to your table. It's a journey that began not in a field or a factory, but around a prehistoric campfire. It is a story of how a simple act of sharing a piece of meat transformed a species, paving the way for language, for society, for culture, and for the complex web of human connection that defines our world today. That simple, generous act, born out of a mix of necessity and strategy, is one of the most fundamental things that makes us human. It's a legacy that we honor with every meal we share. Imagine a world without us, a world bathed in the same African sun, where vast savannas stretched to the horizon, teeming with life. But the figures walking across this ancient landscape aren't human, not yet. Long before Homo sapiens ever took a breath, another lineage of hominins fought for their place in this world. This is their story. A tale of incredible resilience and ultimate disappearance, a ghost chapter in the human family album. They were our distant cousins, a species that walked upright millions of years before us. They weren't apes, and they weren't quite human. They were something in between, a crucial link in the chain of evolution. For over 1 million years, they thrived. 1 million years. That's 4 times longer than modern humans have even existed. Think about that. Every civilization we've ever built, every king, every empire, all of it is just a fleeting moment compared to their marathon of survival. So what was their secret? How did they endure for so long in a world filled with colossal predators and dramatic climate shifts? Part of the answer lies in their adaptability. Their fossilized remains tell a story of a species that was a jack of all trades. Their teeth suggest a flexible diet, fruits, nuts, roots, and maybe even the occasional scavenged meat. They weren't picky eaters, and in a world of feast or famine, that was a superpower. They didn't rely on one single food source, which meant that when one thing became scarce, they could switch to another. They also had the advantage of social living. Like us, they likely lived in groups. There's safety in numbers, after all. A group could better spot a lurking predator, defend its territory, and share knowledge. Imagine a small band of them moving through the tall grass, communicating with gestures and calls we can only guess at. The older, more experienced members would know where to find water during a drought or which plants were safe to eat. This social fabric was their safety net, woven over countless generations. And they were tool users, but not in the way we might think. They didn't have finely crafted hand axes or spears. Theirs was a simpler toolkit, basic stone flakes, sharp-edged rocks used for cutting, scraping, and pounding. These weren't advanced weapons, but they were revolutionary. A sharp stone could slice through tough animal hide to get to the nutritious marrow inside a bone, or dig up hardy tubers buried deep in the dry earth. These simple tools opened up a whole new menu of high-energy foods, fueling their bodies and brains. For 1,000,000 years, this formula worked. They were the dominant hominin on the landscape, a testament to the power of being generalists. They weathered ice ages that came and went, ecosystems that transformed around them. They saw mountains rise and rivers change course. They were the undisputed champions of long-term survival. But then, something changed. The world they had known so well began to shift in ways they had never experienced. The climate became more erratic, swinging wildly between wet and dry periods. The forests they relied on for cover and food began to shrink, replaced by vast, open grasslands. This wasn't a gradual change they could adapt to over millennia. This was a series of rapid, unpredictable shocks to their environment. Suddenly, their jack-of-all-trades strategy started to show its cracks. The plants they ate became less reliable. The open savanna offered fewer places to hide from new, more efficient predators, and critically, they weren't alone anymore. Other hominin species were emerging, including the early ancestors of our own genus, Homo. These newcomers were different. They were specialists. They had larger brains, more sophisticated tools, and were better adapted to a life on the open plains. They were better hunters, better communicators, and better collaborators. They weren't just surviving, they were actively engineering their survival. While our ancient cousins were still using the same simple stone tools their ancestors had used for 1,000,000 years, these new hominins were innovating, creating new technologies to solve new problems. It probably wasn't a violent takeover. There likely weren't epic battles between species. It was something quieter, more gradual, and perhaps even more brutal, a slow-motion competition for resources. Every patch of fruit, every waterhole, every safe place to sleep became a point of contention. And in this new, more competitive world, our ancient, resilient cousins were being consistently, subtly outmaneuvered. Their population, once spread wide across the continent, began to dwindle. Groups became smaller, more isolated. Their genetic diversity plummeted. They were being pushed into the margins of the world, retreating to smaller and smaller pockets of land where they could still eke out a living. It must have been a lonely, confusing time. The world they understood, the rules of survival they had mastered, were no longer working. The final act of their story is lost to time. We don't have a fossil that marks the last of their kind. They simply fade from the record. Did the last group succumb to a drought? Were they outcompeted for the last remaining food source? Or did they simply fail to adapt one last time, their million-year-long flame finally flickering out in the African twilight? We may never know for sure. Their disappearance is a chilling reminder. It tells us that survival is never guaranteed, no matter how successful a species has been. Resilience and adaptability are key, but so is the ability to innovate when the world changes beneath your feet. They were a stunning success story, a species that mastered their environment for an unimaginable length of time. But in the end, the world changed faster than they could. When we look back at their story, we're not just looking at a failed experiment of evolution. We're looking in a mirror. We see the same struggles for food and safety, the same reliance on social bonds and technology. Their story is part of our story. They walked the earth so that one day we could. They are a silent, powerful reminder of just how fragile our own existence is and how privileged we are to be here to tell their tale. 900,000 years ago, the world is a brutal, unpredictable place. Massive ice sheets are crushing continents, volcanoes are spewing ash that blocks out the sun, and rivers are changing course overnight, turning fertile lands into barren wastes. In this chaotic world, our ancestors, a small and scattered group, are fighting for their lives every single day. They're battling hunger, dodging predators, and surviving the whims of a planet that seems determined to wipe them out. And then, something happens. Their numbers plummet, not just in one area, but across the entire globe. The whole of humanity dwindles to a number that's almost impossible to believe, just 1,280 individuals. Think about that for a second. That's not a small town. That's smaller than most high schools today. This wasn't just a local tribe in trouble. This was the entire human lineage, our entire family tree, teetering on the very edge of extinction. How do we know this? It's written in our DNA. Geneticists have found the molecular echo of this catastrophe, a ghost in our genes that tells the story of how close we came to never existing at all. Every single person alive today is a descendant of this tiny, fragile group. Their survival was a knife-edge fight, where every successful hunt, every bit of food found, could have been the deciding factor between our species continuing or vanishing forever. So what could have pushed our ancestors to such a dangerous brink? The primary suspect is the climate. Around this time, Earth plunged into a period of intense glacial cycles. Ice sheets expanded and contracted with terrifying force, bringing bone-chilling winds and killer temperatures. The world our ancestors knew was constantly changing. Forests would vanish, grasslands would shift, and the animals they hunted would become scarce. Imagine trying to feed your family when the world around you is constantly pulling the rug out from under your feet. Competition for dwindling resources would have been fierce, but climate change might not have been the only villain in this story. Scarcity is a slow, creeping enemy. When food is limited, starvation isn't a distant threat. It's a daily reality. It saps your strength, weakens your will, and makes you vulnerable. In a tiny population like this, the effects are devastating. A single new disease could wipe everyone out. The gene pool shrinks, making it harder to adapt to new challenges. A series of unfortunate events, a few failed hunts, an unusually long winter, could trigger a catastrophic collapse. And yet, against all these odds, they held on. It's also possible other cosmic-level disasters played a part. We're talking about things like supervolcano eruptions that could blot out the sun for years, or even meteor impacts. The exact cocktail of challenges that brought humanity to its knees is still a mystery, lost to the deep past. But what is certain is that we were on the verge of being erased from the planet. If that tiny group of 1,280 people had failed, that would have been it. Game over. No second chances, no us, no history, no one to even wonder what happened. But here's the incredible part. They didn't fail. Against all imaginable odds, that small band of survivors persisted. This was one of the tightest bottlenecks any species has ever squeezed through in the history of life on Earth. And from that handful of survivors, humanity slowly, painstakingly began to rebound. They spread out, adapted to new worlds, and laid the groundwork for everything that was to come. Our very existence, every song, every invention, every city hangs on the thread of their survival. The signatures of this near-extinction event are still inside every one of us. Our DNA carries the subtle marks of this population bottleneck, a genetic testament to both our past vulnerability and our incredible resilience. These markers are a constant reminder that survival is never a guarantee. The very traits we consider fundamentally human, our strong immune systems, our ability to live in almost any climate, our instinct for social cooperation, may have been forged in the crucible of this ancient crisis. Our genes tell a story of endurance against impossible odds. This bottleneck might also explain why we became so good at working together, innovating and adapting. When your entire species can fit into a small concert hall, survival isn't about being the strongest. It's about being the smartest and most cohesive. Our ancestors were forced to share resources, develop new tools, and coordinate their movements just to stay alive. Those who were good at it passed on their traits. Those who weren't simply vanished. Evolution, under this extreme pressure, likely selected for more than just physical prowess. It honed the mind, favoring creativity, empathy, and strategic thinking, the very qualities that define us today. The story of this ancient brush with extinction also gives us a profound sense of humility. Earth has been home to countless species, and the vast majority of them are gone, vanished without a trace. Extinction is the rule, not the exception. But for humanity, the stakes were different. Our survival wasn't just about one species making it through. It was the prerequisite for the emergence of everything we call civilization. Our existence is a product of incredible luck, gritty adaptation, and sheer resilience, all converging at just the right moment in deep time. It's humbling to think about. Over 100,000 years of generations, scattered across ancient landscapes, facing threats we can barely imagine, somehow managed to keep the human story going. Every single person in that tiny group made choices that contributed to our being here today. Their struggles paved the way for language, art, science, and our ability to look back and piece together our own origin story. The profound fragility of that moment teaches us a timeless lesson. Survival is never guaranteed, and the story of life is a constant negotiation with forces far beyond our control. So what can we learn from our ancestors' near miss? First and foremost, it's a powerful lesson in resilience. They weren't just victims of their environment, they were active agents in their own survival. They adapted, they innovated, and they persevered, even when their numbers were terrifyingly low. They showed us that cooperation and persistence can be the deciding factors between survival and oblivion. At the same time, this is a serious cautionary tale. The Earth is still a place of extremes. And now, many of the greatest threats we face are of our own making. Understanding how our species survived a past crisis gives us a blueprint for the future. It's a stark reminder to respect the delicate ecological balances that sustain us. Our actions today, from how we treat the climate to how we manage our planet's resources, could create new bottlenecks and new crises on a global scale. Ultimately, the story of humanity 900,000 years ago is one of improbability and endurance. It's the story of how a population of just over 1,000 people rebounded to become a global species that developed fire, tools, art, and culture. Each of us carries the echo of that perilous time in our DNA, a reminder of how close we came to never being here at all. This story is more than just science. It's a meditation on the fragile miracle of our own existence. It challenges us to see ourselves not as the masters of this planet, but as the lucky inheritors of a long, precarious, and incredible chain of survival. When you look back into that deep past, you can almost feel the wind on those ancient plains and hear the distant sounds of a world teeming with danger. It's a story about a handful of people facing monumental odds and how intelligence and cooperation helped them win. That near-extinction event wasn't the end of humanity. In a way, it was the very thing that forged us into the species we are today. It's a powerful reminder that our existence was never a certainty, but a beautiful, improbable reality. Across the vast expanse of human history, certain moments shimmer like distant stars, points where everything shifts, where life is reshaped in ways both subtle and profound. Some of these moments are visible in the landscapes around us, jagged cliffs worn by wind, rivers carving deep valleys, and plains stretching endlessly under the sun. Others lie hidden, inscribed in our very DNA, whispers of struggles and triumphs that have survived for hundreds of thousands of years. From the first humans who set foot in Europe to the mysterious journeys across ice and sea into the Americas, the story of humanity is a story of endurance, ingenuity, and the unquenchable curiosity that drives us forward. Long before modern cities rose from stone and steel, our ancestors faced a raw and unforgiving world. They were among the first humans to enter Europe, stepping into landscapes dominated by cold winds, shifting climates, and predators that reigned supreme. For hundreds of thousands of years, they endured where few others could, navigating forests and plains teeming with both opportunity and danger. Every decision mattered. A misstep could bring starvation, a predator, or exposure to the merciless cold. Through courage and skill, they persisted. They hunted, they crafted tools, they adapted. But then, something changed. The very continent that once sheltered them became the stage for their disappearance. What allowed them to survive for so long, and what silent force ultimately erased them from history? Around 300,000 years ago, our ancestors began crafting tools unlike any seen before. Blades, spears, and weapons shaped with purpose, precision, and foresight. These were not mere accidents. They were the product of imagination, intelligence, and cooperation. But why did humans alone take this leap, while no other species followed? Was it a superior intellect, a spark of creativity, or a deeper drive to reshape the world? Archaeologists now see these ancient artifacts not just as tools, but as evidence of a uniquely human ability to transcend the limits of the body and environment. Each stone blade represents a spark of innovation, a testament to a species capable of shaping its own destiny. Meanwhile, beneath our feet, the Earth itself reminds us of its power. Dormant supervolcanoes, giants capable of reshaping continents, have shaped climates and perhaps even the fates of early humans. Their fury is a silent reminder that survival is never guaranteed, that life exists in a delicate balance with forces far greater than ourselves. Our earliest ancestors learned not just to hunt and craft, but to navigate a world where the planet itself was a living, sometimes hostile participant. This is the stage upon which our story unfolds. And then there were the Neanderthals, our closest known relatives. They vanished from the Earth roughly 40,000 years ago, yet traces of them live on inside many of us today. For decades, their story was told as one of simple extinction, a species overwhelmed by the arrival of modern humans, but recent discoveries have completely rewritten this narrative. We now know that our ancestors and Neanderthals met, mingled, and interbred. Pieces of Neanderthal DNA survive in modern humans, influencing everything from our immune systems and metabolism to our skin and hair. This hidden legacy challenges the very notion of disappearance. The Neanderthals, it seems, never truly vanished. They simply became part of us. Across oceans and ice, humanity then undertook journeys that defy imagination. The first humans to reach the Americas had no maps, no written language, no guideposts other than the sun, stars, and the land itself. They crossed a vast frozen land bridge connecting Asia to North America, a world both alien and treacherous. The evidence of their passage is scattered and mysterious. Tools buried in ancient sediment, footprints preserved in hardened mud, and the faint genetic traces left behind in today's indigenous populations. These weren't random wanderings, they were deliberate, courageous, and profoundly human expeditions into the unknown. They remind us that exploration is a testament to the enduring drive that defines our species. So, how did they do it? For a long time, the dominant theory was a single, rapid migration over the Bering Land Bridge about 13,000 years ago. But new discoveries keep pushing that date further back, suggesting a much more complex story. Some evidence points to coastal migrations, with early people using boats to hopscotch down the Pacific coast, living off the rich marine life. Other finds, like the 23,000-year-old footprints in White Sands, New Mexico, suggest humans were present in the Americas far earlier than we ever thought, during the height of the last ice age. This means they navigated a continent locked in ice, with massive glaciers blocking their path. How they survived, let alone thrived, is one of the greatest mysteries of human prehistory. In each of these stories, Europe's first humans, the emergence of tools, the Neanderthals' legacy, and the migration to the Americas, we see a recurring theme: adaptation. Humanity has always been defined not just by the capacity to survive, but by the ability to learn, innovate, and endure against the odds. Our ancestors navigated a world of ice and fire, predators and pathogens, crafting solutions that ensured the continuation of life. In every adaptation lies a lesson. Resilience is rarely the product of strength alone. It is the combination of intelligence, social cooperation, and an intimate understanding of the environment. Yet for all their achievements, they were never immune to the forces of chance. The Earth is an indifferent stage. Supervolcanoes erupted, reshaping continents. Climatic shifts forced migrations and extinctions. The Neanderthals, despite their sophistication, disappeared from the visible world, leaving remnants of their life to shape our own. And still, humanity endured, leaving a record not just of survival, but of innovation, courage, and adaptability. The story of our species is a story of connections. Connections between humans and Neanderthals, between distant lands and daring explorers, between the raw forces of nature and the ingenuity of those who sought to master them. It is a story written in stone, ice, fire, and DNA. A narrative of life's persistence in the face of overwhelming odds. To study these threads is to confront the essence of what it means to be human. It's understanding that survival is never guaranteed, that innovation can determine the fate of a species, and that the choices of our ancestors ripple across millennia to shape the world we inhabit today. And so, as we look back, we are reminded that history is not a straight line, but a mosaic of triumphs, failures, encounters, and innovations. The Earth itself is a participant, its forces shaping life even as life adapts. And humanity, in all its fragility and brilliance, is both a product of and a witness to these vast unfolding dramas. From the distant past to the present, our journey continues, driven by the curiosity and courage that has carried us across the ice and into the unknown. In every stone blade, every fossil, every fragment of ancient DNA, we can hear the whispers of those who came before us. Their story is our story. Their survival, their journeys, and their legacy continue to shape us, reminding us that life is resilient, intricate, and endlessly extraordinary. 40,000 years ago, the Neanderthals vanished from the Earth, or so we thought. For centuries, we pictured them as a distant, extinct branch of our family tree, their lives erased by time. The caves they called home fell silent, their fires cooled, and yet the echoes of their existence are not gone. They linger, woven into our very DNA like a secret message from the shadows of prehistory. For decades, the story was simple. Modern humans arrived, outcompeted them, and they quietly disappeared. A cautionary tale. But as our scientific tools grew sharper, this narrative began to unravel. The story of the Neanderthals, it turns out, is not just one of extinction. It is a story of survival, of a hidden legacy. Modern humans outside of Africa carry between 1% and 2% Neanderthal DNA. Genes that shaped our immunity, our skin, and our hair can be traced back to these ancient cousins. In a way, they never vanished at all. They live on, inside us. Imagine Europe 50,000 years ago, a world of immense challenge. Towering glaciers carved the land. Herds of mammoths and woolly rhinos roamed vast plains. In this world, Neanderthals thrived. They were skilled hunters and toolmakers, leaving behind stone blades of extraordinary precision. Their existence was harsh, demanding adaptability and ingenuity. And then we arrived, anatomically modern humans, with lighter tools and more complex social networks. Over generations, our ancestors and Neanderthals met again and again. Some encounters were hostile, a competition for resources, but others were far more intimate. Recent studies of ancient DNA reveal clear evidence that Neanderthals and modern humans mated, sharing not only the same landscapes, but their genetic fabric. This discovery transformed our understanding of human history. Extinction wasn't total. The Neanderthals didn't vanish in a single catastrophic event. Their legacy was absorbed, woven into the tapestry of human life. The genes they gave our ancestors may have conferred critical advantages, immunity to new viruses or adaptations to colder climates. In this sense, they didn't just die out, they merged with the lineage that would become us. Their survival was hidden, invisible to the naked eye, yet profound in its consequences. The implications are staggering. Some Neanderthal genes that persist in us help fend off infections, shaped by millennia of adaptation. Others influence our skin and hair, traits molded by the sun, cold, and wind. Yet this legacy is a double-edged sword. These same genetic fragments might also make us more susceptible to allergies or certain autoimmune conditions, a gift and a burden from our ancient relatives. And the story doesn't end there. Scientists are now investigating if these DNA fragments influence our behavior, our cognition, even our mood. Could aspects of our risk-taking, social perception, or memory be echoes of Neanderthal life? The very idea challenges our understanding of what it means to be human. We are not the isolated products of a single lineage. We are the living sum of countless interactions, encounters, and adaptations that stretch across continents and epochs. The Neanderthals weren't a separate story. They are part of ours. This revelation reshapes more than biology. It reshapes our identity. For centuries, we've seen ourselves as the ultimate survivors, the pinnacle of evolution. The narrative of Neanderthals as primitive or doomed was rooted more in our own prejudice than in science. In truth, they were complex, intelligent, and highly adaptable. Their disappearance was not a failure, but a transformation of their legacy. The genes that persist in us are proof that their influence endures, quietly shaping the contours of our existence. To understand this hidden legacy is to confront profound questions about survival itself. Extinction, it appears, is rarely absolute. Life isn't a series of separate chapters, but an overlapping web of stories where even those who vanish leave behind traces that resonate for millennia. Their story is a reminder that survival isn't just about dominance. It's about connection and integration in the face of relentless change. We are, in a sense, walking monuments to their memory. In every immune response, every strand of hair, every adaptation to our environment, there is a whisper of Neanderthal life. As we probe our genomes with ever greater precision, we uncover more fragments of this ancient inheritance, each one a testament to the enduring complexity of human history. It is a legacy that defies simple categorization, neither fully gone nor fully present, a bridge between the past and the present. Perhaps the greatest lesson of all is humility. The Neanderthal survival hidden in our DNA reminds us that life is rarely simple and history is never linear. Evolution is not a competition with a single winner. It is a conversation across time, a dialogue between species, environments, and genes. So when we look in the mirror, we see a modern human. But beneath the surface, within the very code that shapes our bodies and minds, lies a hidden story. A story of quiet, persistent survival. It's a story that challenges the simplicity of extinction, reminding us that the past is never truly gone. The Neanderthals may have disappeared from the Earth 40,000 years ago, but they did not disappear from the human story. Their genes remain, hidden yet active, a silent testament to resilience. To study them is to look beyond simple narratives of survival, to peer into the complex, intertwined pathways that have shaped all of us. Their story is a reminder that life leaves traces far beyond what the eye can see, and that disappearance does not mean erasure. In this hidden inheritance, the Neanderthals endure, not as ghosts of the past, but as living echoes that continue to shape who we are and who we may yet become. In the vast tapestry of existence, there are stories written not in ink, but in the shifting of continents, the whisper of winds, and the slow dance of ice across a primeval world. These are stories older than memory, yet they are alive in the pulse of the present, woven into the fragile web of life that spans oceans, mountains, and endless skies. To witness them is to glimpse the heartbeat of our planet, a rhythm both eternal and fleeting, a cadence that has shaped the fates of countless beings long before the first human gaze ever met the horizon. Across the expanse of time, the Earth has been a stage of unimaginable grandeur. Its landscapes are monuments to both patience and fury, jagged peaks piercing clouds, rivers carving valleys over millennia, deserts stretching like golden seas under the relentless sun. In these landscapes, life emerges, flourishes, and adapts in forms both familiar and alien. Here, in the quiet corners of a forest or atop a windswept cliff, the drama of existence unfolds in a way both intimate and colossal. Every moment, every heartbeat, every flicker of movement is a note in an endless symphony composed by nature itself. Beneath the ice of the poles, in oceans yet unexplored, and within dense jungles where sunlight barely reaches, life moves with a precision honed by billions of years of evolution. Predators and prey, plants and pollinators, rivers and tides, all act in concert, a choreography that balances survival with the raw poetry of existence. And amidst this intricate theater of life, there exists a creature both fragile and enduring: humanity. From the first tentative steps upon the land to the triumphs of civilization, humans have moved with curiosity, awe, and an unquenchable desire to understand the universe around them. The story of humanity is, in essence, the story of survival against overwhelming odds. Our ancestors emerged from the cradle of Africa, navigating landscapes both harsh and abundant. They braved winds that cut like blades, temperatures that could freeze the marrow, and predators that stalked with silent, deadly patience. Their lives were measured not just in years, but in fleeting moments of triumph and tragedy. They discovered fire and its warmth. They learned the language of stone and wood. They mapped the stars and found in their patterns the first glimpses of wonder and fear. Every discovery was both a triumph and a challenge, a step forward on a path that would wind for hundreds of thousands of years. Yet survival was never guaranteed. The same forces that shaped human ingenuity, the relentless advance of ice, the merciless shift of climates, the unpredictable fury of nature, could just as easily bring extinction. And indeed, across the vast epochs of time, countless species of human-like beings walked the earth, some overlapping with others, some disappearing silently into the mists of history. They left behind traces, bones, tools, and faint echoes of culture, like whispers in the wind that tell a story without words. We are the inheritors of these legacies, shaped by the choices of those who came before, yet forever confronted with the mysteries of their disappearance. Imagine, if you will, the icy tundras of Pleistocene Europe. Here, humans faced winters that stretched like endless white deserts, with snowdrifts that could swallow whole forests and winds that carried death in their icy breath. They hunted animals larger and more powerful than themselves, tracking herds with a combination of cunning, courage, and intuition. In these frozen landscapes, every decision mattered. A misstep could mean starvation, exposure, or the jaws of a predator lying in wait. Yet these early humans endured. They adapted, learned, and thrived in a world that seemed designed to erase them. Their survival was an epic in itself, a testament to resilience in the face of forces far greater than any one individual. And then, as suddenly as their story seemed eternal, the world changed. Climates shifted with unforgiving speed, forests became deserts, and ice sheets advanced, then receded. Competitors, other human species, or even environmental challenges appeared, bringing new pressures to an already precarious existence. Slowly, the species that had once flourished began to vanish. Some disappeared into the shadows of history without trace, leaving only faint impressions in the soil and stone. Others were absorbed through contact with surviving populations, their uniqueness dissolved in the relentless flow of time. What caused their final extinction? Was it climate, competition, disease, or a subtle combination of all three? The answer is as elusive as the wind over the tundra, yet the question itself illuminates a profound truth. Survival is never guaranteed, and existence is always fragile. Across the globe, these dramas played out in parallel. In Africa, the cradle of humanity, our ancestors faced a shifting mosaic of savanna and forest, rivers that could flood without warning, and predators that tested every skill and instinct. In Asia, dense jungles and sprawling plains challenged the ingenuity of early humans, demanding new tools, cooperation, and knowledge of the land. In Europe, glaciers and towering mountains tested endurance and strategy in equal measure. Each region offered unique challenges, each demanded adaptation, and each shaped the story of life in ways that still echo today. The beauty of this story lies not only in its survival, but also in its interconnectedness. Every footprint, every cave painting, every bone tells a chapter of a larger narrative, a narrative that spans continents and millennia. These humans were not passive observers. They were participants in the grand drama of existence, shaping their environment even as it shaped them. Their innovations, fire, tools, art, and language, became the scaffolding upon which the future of humanity would rise. Their struggles were monumental, yet they were also poetic, a testament to curiosity, creativity, and the indomitable will to endure. And as we gaze into the cosmos, tracing the paths of stars and planets, we find reflections of these same struggles. The universe itself is a theater of creation and destruction. Stars explode to give birth to new worlds. Galaxies collide in slow-motion dances of gravity. Black holes devour light with silent hunger. In these cosmic dramas, we see mirrors of our own fragility, resilience, and fleeting brilliance. To understand the Earth, to understand life, is to glimpse the workings of a cosmos both indifferent and magnificent. a universe in which our species is but one note in a symphony of unimaginable scale. Ultimately, the story of life, of humanity, is a story of endurance, adaptation, and awe. It is a story written in bones and stone, in rivers and forests, in the very air we breathe and the stars we gaze upon. It is a story of survival against relentless odds, of beauty emerging from struggle, and of mysteries that endure long after the last footprints fade. And while the humans of the distant past may have vanished, their echoes remain, whispering lessons about resilience, ingenuity, and the fleeting, precious nature of existence itself. In the end, to witness these stories is to witness the grandeur of life in its most intimate and cosmic forms. It is to see the poetry in survival, the drama in adaptation, and the eternal rhythm that connects all beings, from the smallest microbe to the most towering mountain, from the fleeting life of an early human to the vast life cycles of the stars. It is a reminder that existence, in all its fragility and brilliance, is a gift and a challenge, a fleeting moment of light in the endless night of time. And it is in this light, this fleeting, radiant pulse, that we find our connection to the past, our responsibility to the present, and our wonder at the boundless, ever-unfolding universe. They were among the first humans to ever set foot on the European continent, wanderers from a world that no longer exists. Imagine this: footprints pressed into mud and volcanic ash more than 400,000 years ago, telling the story of an ancient exodus. They didn't arrive in great armies or migrations, but in small, tight-knit family bands. They were hunters, toolmakers, and perhaps even dreamers, following the winding trails of rivers and the great herds across plains that would one day become France, Germany, and Spain. The Europe they discovered was not the green and gentle land we know. It was a continent of extremes, an unpredictable stage where ice and fire took turns ruling. Massive glaciers ground down from the north, crushing mountains into dust. But in the brief, warm ages between the freezes, steaming forests and wide savannas bloomed. This was a land of giants. Mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses roamed the open steppe, while saber-toothed cats lurked in the shadows. Giant cave bears slept through long, harsh winters in the very caverns these early humans would later claim as their own shelters. Against such overwhelming odds, they survived. For hundreds of thousands of years, they adapted to every challenge the earth could throw at them. They learned to chip flint into blades sharper than any bone, to carve wooden spears and harden them in fire, to track the subtle movements of prey across miles of frozen tundra. They conquered the darkness with flames, fiercely guarded their young, and buried their dead with a care that hints at deep emotion and maybe even a kind of faith. These weren't our direct ancestors, but they were our kin. They were the Neanderthals. Homo neanderthalensis, a human lineage forged in ice and defined by endurance. But their story begins even earlier. Before the Neanderthals, there were others, shadowy predecessors known only from scattered bones and broken tools. We call them the Heidelberg people, and we know of their distant cousins, the Denisovans in the east, and perhaps other species we haven't even named yet. Together, they formed a complex web of early humanity that stretched from the valleys of Spain to the mountains of Siberia, all bound by common struggles and fleeting encounters. They walked upright, hunted in groups, and carried within them the spark of curiosity, that same restless impulse that would one day drive our species, Homo sapiens, all the way to the moon. But for all their incredible resilience, something changed. Around 40,000 years ago, the Neanderthals, who had endured countless ice ages, fearsome predators, and periods of starvation, simply vanished. Their distinctive tools disappeared from the archaeological record. Their caves, once filled with the sounds of life, fell silent. The fires that had flickered in the darkness for millennia went cold. The question that haunts us to this day is as simple as it is profound. What happened to them? For centuries, this mystery has fueled both science and our collective imagination. Early scholars, looking through a lens of arrogance, painted them as brutish and inferior, claiming they were doomed to extinction the moment modern humans arrived. But that simplistic view has been completely dismantled by evidence. We now know the Neanderthals were intelligent, creative, and emotionally complex beings. They were painting on cave walls long before our ancestors even reached Europe. They crafted jewelry from eagle talons and shells. They cared for their sick and elderly. In every way that truly mattered, they were human. So why did they vanish? The answer probably isn't a single dramatic catastrophe, but 1,000 small pressures, each one subtle, but together they were fatal. The climate may have been their first silent adversary. Neanderthals were masters of the cold. Their broad, stocky bodies and strong limbs were perfectly adapted for conserving heat. But Europe's climate began to shift with terrifying speed. As the ice advanced and retreated, the forests they depended on vanished, the great herds they hunted moved on, and the world they had known for millennia became dangerously unstable. For a species so finely tuned to a specific environment, even a small, persistent change could tip the delicate balance toward extinction. And then came us, Homo sapiens, modern humans, arriving from Africa around 45,000 years ago. To the Neanderthals, these strangers must have seemed both familiar and alien, similar enough to recognize as fellow humans, yet different in ways that mattered. These newcomers brought new kinds of tools, new hunting strategies, and likely larger, more complex social networks that allowed them to adapt faster. They also brought something less visible, but far more powerful, a new kind of imagination. Modern humans began to paint, to tell stories, to carve symbols that represented abstract ideas. This kind of thinking allowed them to cooperate on a scale the Neanderthals may never have matched. Culture, in essence, became a survival tool as important as fire or flint. For a time, the two species coexisted. In the caves of southern Europe and the valleys of the Near East they met. And they didn't always meet in violence because we know they interbred. Today, traces of Neanderthal DNA remain in nearly every non-African person alive. Silent, genetic proof that our ancestors didn't just replace them, but in some ways absorbed them. Still, within a few thousand years of our arrival, the Neanderthals were gone. The very last of them may have taken refuge in the mountains of southern Spain or the caves of Croatia. Can you picture it? A lone hunter standing at the mouth of his cave, watching the sun set over a land his people had ruled for hundreds of thousands of years. He feels the chill wind of the coming night and senses that something vast, something fundamental, is ending. His children may not understand the weight of it, but he does. The world is changing, and this time his kind will not survive it. So was it direct competition that doomed them? Or was it a perfect storm of bad winters, plummeting prey numbers and shrinking habitats that simply pushed them beyond the point of recovery? Maybe it was diseases carried by the newcomers that swept through their small, isolated groups. Or perhaps, as some scientists believe, their extinction was less of a dramatic event and more of a slow blending, their bloodlines merging so completely into ours until nothing purely Neanderthal remained. Whatever the truth is, their disappearance fundamentally reshaped the human story. With them gone, Homo sapiens became the last surviving branch of a once diverse human family. We inherited the world alone, but not unmarked. In our genes, in our art, and in our capacity for endurance, the Neanderthals live on. Their fate is both a warning and a mirror. They remind us that survival is never guaranteed, that even the most successful species can fade away when the world changes faster than they can adapt. Yet they also remind us of our shared, ancient resilience. Every heartbeat today carries echoes of their struggle against wind, cold, and hunger. When archaeologists uncover a fragment of a skull or a stone tool buried deep in a cave floor, they aren't just touching old bones. They are touching the memory of an entire world, a world of fire-lit nights, of stone and silence, of incredible courage born in the face of extinction. The continent that once sheltered them also became the stage for their final act. But in that ending, a new story began, ours. So we ask again, what kept them alive for so long? What kept? It was their strength, their intelligence, their ability to read the land and its rhythms. And what silent force finally erased them from history? Maybe it wasn't a single force at all, but the quiet, relentless march of time. Evolution, reshaping life, one small change at a time, until the old world finally yielded to the new. Yet, to stand before the ruins of their caves, to hold one of their tools in your hand, is to feel their presence still. The wind that howls through Europe's ancient valleys once filled their lungs. The stars that guided their nocturnal hunts still shine above us. They are gone, but they are not forgotten. Their story is not one of failure, but of endurance beyond imagination. For hundreds of thousands of years, they survived where few could. And even in their vanishing, they passed something of themselves into us. In that sense, the Neanderthals never truly vanished. They became a part of the only species left to remember them, and through us, their fire still burns. They weren't supposed to be this clever. For generations, the word Neanderthal has been an insult, a synonym for brute force and simple minds. We pictured them as hunched, grunting figures, surviving day to day on instinct alone, a failed experiment on the long road to us. For 150 years, science painted this picture and we all accepted it. But what if that picture is completely wrong? What if the evidence we've held up as proof of their simplicity was actually pointing to something far more complex, something we just weren't ready to see? Recent discoveries are forcing us to tear down that old caricature. Piece by piece, a new image of the Neanderthals is emerging, one of a people who were not just survivors, but planners, thinkers, and innovators. A discovery deep within a cave system reveals a level of foresight and cooperation that turns our old assumptions on their head. It hints at a social structure and a strategic mind that rivals our own early ancestors. Could it be that our long-extinct cousins were not our intellectual inferiors, but our equals? This isn't just a small correction in the history books, it's a fundamental rewriting of who we thought they were, and in turn, who we think we are. The truth, as we're about to uncover, changes everything we know about the human story. Let's journey back, not just thousands, but tens of thousands of years. The world is a harsher place. An ice age grips the continents, and it is here in this unforgiving landscape that the Neanderthals thrived for over 300,000 years. That's more than 6 times longer than our own species, Homo sapiens, has had civilization. Think about that for a moment. To survive for that long through countless cycles of freezing and thawing, you can't just be lucky. You have to be smart. You have to be adaptable. You have to be masters of your environment. Our old view suggested they were ambush hunters, relying on brute strength to take down lone animals that wandered too close. We imagined them, spears in hand, hiding behind a rock, waiting for a single powerful lunge. But this new evidence paints a radically different scene. We're not talking about a chance encounter, we're talking about a large-scale coordinated operation. What archaeologists have found isn't just a random collection of bones at the bottom of a ravine. It's a carefully selected single-species graveyard, dozens of massive bison, all herded to the same location and driven to their deaths. This wasn't an accident. This was a plan. To pull this off, you need a level of sophistication we never gave them credit for. First, you need deep knowledge of the land. The Neanderthals had to know this ravine existed, know its steepness, and understand that it could be used as a natural trap. They couldn't just stumble upon it during a hunt. They had to scout it, study it, and incorporate it into their strategy long before the herd ever appeared. Then comes the understanding of animal behavior. They had to know the migration patterns of the bison. Where would the herd be, and when? How would it react when pressured? Which direction would it run? This isn't just about chasing an animal. It's about predicting its movements, manipulating its instincts, and using its own herd mentality against it. They were essentially animal psychologists, using their knowledge to guide a stampede. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, this required communication and cooperation. A single Neanderthal, or even a small disorganized group, couldn't do this. This required a team, a community working as one. You would need beaters, individuals who would make noise and show themselves to get the herd moving in the right direction. You'd need flankers, positioned along the route to keep the herd from breaking away, funneling them towards the cliff edge. And you'd need the killers, waiting below to finish off any animals that survived the fall. Each person has a role. Each person has to trust that the others will do their part at the right moment. This implies a form of communication more complex than simple grunts. They must have been able to convey abstract concepts. We will drive the herd from the north, past the big rock, and into the ravine. You wait here, you go there. This is project management, Ice Age style. This is evidence of a social structure of shared goals and of a collective intelligence. They weren't just a family. They were a highly efficient hunting party, a coordinated team. And think about the reward. This single event could provide enough food to sustain the entire group for weeks, maybe even months. The meat, the hide for clothing and shelter, the bones for tools and marrow. This wasn't just about getting a meal for the night. This was about securing the future. It's an act of incredible foresight. They were planning for the long, cold winter ahead. This is not the behavior of a simple-minded brute living from one moment to the next. This is the behavior of a calculating, intelligent people who understood cause and effect, who planned for the future, and who worked together to achieve a common goal. This bison kill site isn't an isolated incident. All across Europe and Asia, we're finding more and more evidence that shatters the old myths. We've found traces of pigments and decorated shells, suggesting they had a sense of symbolism and art. We've discovered evidence they cared for their sick and elderly, with skeletons of individuals who had debilitating injuries but lived for years afterward, meaning someone had to be feeding and protecting them. This speaks to empathy, to compassion, to a social bond that went beyond pure survival. We've even found evidence they might have deliberately buried their dead, sometimes with grave goods. This points to a deeper, more abstract level of thought, the possibility of ritual, of a belief system, of contemplating what comes after life. These are the hallmarks of humanity, traits we once proudly claimed were exclusively our own. Now, we have to confront the fact that we shared them with our so-called primitive cousins. So why did we get them so wrong for so long? Part of it might be ego. When the first Neanderthal skeletons were discovered in the 19th century, the idea of evolution was new and controversial. We wanted to see a clear, linear progression with ourselves at the very top. Placing the Neanderthals on a lower rung as a brutish dead end made our own success story seem more special, more inevitable. We were Homo sapiens, the wise men, and we needed them to be the simple ones to make our own wisdom shine brighter. But the science is undeniable now. The genetic evidence shows that most humans outside of Africa carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA. They are not some distant other. They are part of our own story, part of our own ancestry. We met them, we lived alongside them, and we interbred with them. Their legacy lives on within us. When we look at this new picture, we see a people who were masters of a harsh world. They created sophisticated stone tools, controlled fire, built shelters, and hunted the largest and most dangerous animals on the planet. They were resourceful, resilient, and intelligent. They survived for hundreds of thousands of years in conditions that would test modern humans to their absolute limits. They weren't a failed experiment, they were a staggering success story. Their ultimate disappearance is still one of science's great mysteries. Was it climate change, competition with our own ancestors, a combination of factors we still don't know for sure? But what we do know is that we can no longer dismiss them. We have to afford them the respect they deserve as a complex and capable parallel form of humanity. They weren't just clever, they were brilliant survivors, thinkers, and maybe even dreamers. And acknowledging their intelligence doesn't diminish our own. It enriches the entire human story, making it more complex, more interesting, and ultimately more humble. The Neanderthals weren't a stepping stone to us. They were a people in their own right, and we are only just beginning to understand how truly clever they were. Do you ever look back at those old textbook drawings of human evolution? You know the one, the ape slowly standing up, turning into a Neanderthal, and finally into us, modern humans. It makes it feel like evolution is this grand, finished story, something that happened millions of years ago, and now we're just done, like we're the final draft. But what if I told you that couldn't be further from the truth? What if evolution is happening right now, inside you, around you, and we're just too close to see it? Scientists are discovering that our bodies and minds are still in a constant state of flux. We're not the endpoint, we're just another chapter. And the next chapter? It might be the most dramatic one yet, because for the first time in history, we're not just being shaped by nature, we're being shaped by something we created, technology. So let's explore this mind-bending idea. How is the human species evolving right now, and what could we look like 1,000 years from now? Will we still be recognizably human, or are we on the verge of becoming something entirely new? Let's start with the basics. Evolution isn't about becoming better or more advanced. It's simply about adapting to our environment. The traits that help a species survive and reproduce get passed on. For most of our history, that environment was the natural world. We needed to be strong enough to hunt, fast enough to escape predators, and have immune systems tough enough to fight off diseases. But our environment has changed more in the last few hundred years than it did in the previous 100,000. We don't hunt mammoths anymore. We order groceries on an app. We don't outrun saber-toothed tigers. We sit in traffic. This new man-made world is creating entirely new evolutionary pressures. Take our diet, for example. For millennia, humans ate whatever they could find. Food was scarce, and our bodies evolved to be incredibly efficient at storing fat. That was a lifesaver during a famine. But today, in many parts of the world, calories are cheap and abundant. That same fat-storing superpower is now contributing to widespread health issues. So, is evolution responding? Some scientists think so. There is evidence that populations with a long history of agriculture developed better tolerance to things like dairy and starches. It's possible that over generations, our bodies could adapt to our modern, sugar-rich diets. Maybe in a few hundred years, humans will have metabolisms that can handle a daily soda without a problem. It's a slow process, but it's happening. Another fascinating area is our immune system. With the rise of modern medicine, antibiotics, and vaccines, we've outsourced a lot of our defense against germs. This has been amazing for our lifespan, but it might be making our natural immune systems a bit lazy. At the same time, living in hyper-sanitized environments from a young age might be contributing to the rise of allergies and autoimmune disorders. Our immune systems are basically getting bored and looking for a fight, sometimes attacking our own bodies. Evolution might select for a more balanced immune system in the future, one that's less likely to overreact in our clean modern world. And what about our brains? Our brains are incredibly plastic, shaped by our experiences. The way we think today is fundamentally different from how our ancestors thought. We process immense amounts of information daily, multitasking across screens, communicating instantly with people across the globe. This constant stream of data could be shaping our neural pathways. Are we evolving to have better short-term memory for passwords and trivia, but maybe a shorter attention span? It's a real possibility. The skills needed to thrive in an information-based society are different from the skills needed to survive in the wild. Future generations might be naturally better at filtering information, spotting patterns in data, and collaborating in digital spaces. Their brains might literally be wired differently to handle the demands of a hyper-connected world. But this is where it gets really wild. So far, we've talked about natural, albeit modern, evolution, the slow grind of genetic change over generations. But now we have a new player in the game: technology. Specifically, technologies that allow us to directly edit our own biology. Things like CRISPR gene editing technology are no longer science fiction. They offer the potential to eliminate genetic diseases like cystic fibrosis or Huntington's. That's an incredible, noble goal. But where do we draw the line? If we can edit out a gene for a disease, could we also edit in a gene for higher intelligence, or enhanced strength, or a longer lifespan? This isn't natural selection anymore. This is intelligent design, with us as the designers. We could, in theory, direct our own evolution. Imagine parents being able to choose certain genetic traits for their children. It opens a Pandora's box of ethical questions. Would it create a new class system, a genetic divide between the enhanced and the naturals? It's a future we need to think about very carefully. And then there's the ultimate merger, humans and machines. We're already cyborgs in a way. How many of you feel a little lost without your smartphone? It's an extension of our brain, a repository for our memories, our navigator, our connection to the world. Now take that a step further. Brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs, are being developed right now. They can help people with paralysis control robotic limbs with their thoughts. But the technology could one day become mainstream. Imagine being able to access the internet with a thought, or learning a new skill by simply downloading it into your brain, Matrix style. In 1,000 years, the line between human and machine could become completely blurred. We might have synthetic organs that never fail, nanobots in our bloodstream that repair cells and fight off disease, and neural implants that augment our memory and intelligence 1,000-fold. Our physical forms might become modular, adaptable, and far more resilient than the fragile bodies we have today. This leads to the big question: will we even be human anymore? A being that is part biological, part digital, with a lifespan of centuries and cognitive abilities far beyond our own. Is that the next step on the evolutionary ladder? Are we destined to become Homo technologicus? Some futurists believe this is our inevitable destiny, the only way to survive the challenges of the future, like climate change or exploring space. To colonize Mars, we might need to be genetically engineered to withstand radiation or have integrated life support systems. Our biological form is perfectly adapted for Earth, but it's quite limited beyond it. Of course, there's a flip side to this techno-optimism. What do we lose in this transition? Is there something essential about our humanity that's tied to our limitations, our struggles, our mortality? Our art, our love, our compassion? Are these things born from our fragile biological existence? Would a post-human being, a godlike cyborg, still care about a beautiful sunset or a moving piece of music? Maybe the future of humanity isn't just one path, but many. Perhaps some will choose to merge with technology, ascending to a new plane of existence. Others might choose to remain natural, perhaps even using genetic engineering to readapt to a more natural world, rejecting the digital realm. We could see a splintering of the human species into different forms, each adapted to a different environment and a different philosophy of life. So, the next time you look in the mirror, remember you're not looking at a finished product. You are a work in progress. You are a transitional form. The story of evolution is still being written, and we are living through its most exciting, unpredictable, and perhaps most important chapter. The choices we make today about our technology, our environment, and our values are planting the seeds for what humanity will become 1,000 years from now. It's a little scary and a lot exciting. What do you think the human of the future will look like? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I'm genuinely curious to hear your predictions. Imagine a world without cities, without farms, without even the idea of a permanent home. For millions of years, this was our reality. Our ancestors were wanderers, nomads moving with the rhythm of the seasons, part of the landscape, not its master. They were expert hunters, skilled gatherers, surviving day to day on what nature provided. Their lives were a constant journey, a dance of survival across vast, untamed continents. They possessed an intimate knowledge of the wild, reading the signs of the earth, the sky, and the animals around them. This was the human story for 99% of our time on this planet. Then, around 12,000 years ago, in a geological blink of an eye, everything changed. A profound revolution began, not with a bang, but with a single seed planted in the soil. Scattered groups of people in different parts of the world independently started to do something unprecedented. They stopped moving. They chose to stay in one place, build permanent settlements, and cultivate the land. This shift from hunting and gathering to agriculture is arguably the most significant transformation in human history. It's called the Neolithic Revolution. But what triggered this monumental change? Why did our ancestors trade the freedom of the open plains for the backbreaking labor of farming? The answer isn't simple, and it's a story that continues to fascinate and challenge historians and archaeologists today. Let's travel back to the end of the last ice age, around 10,000 BCE. The great ice sheets that had covered much of the globe were retreating, and the world's climate was becoming warmer and more stable. This climatic shift created new, fertile environments, particularly in a region we now call the Fertile Crescent, an arc of land stretching from modern-day Egypt through the Levant and into Iraq and Iran. Rivers like the Tigris, Euphrates, and Nile swelled with meltwater, creating lush valleys and deltas. In these newly temperate zones, certain wild plants began to thrive, plants that were particularly useful to humans. Wild wheat, barley, lentils, and chickpeas grew in abundance. It was a natural larder, a paradise for hunter-gatherers. For a time, our ancestors likely enjoyed this bounty. They could stay in one place for longer periods, harvesting the plentiful wild grains without needing to constantly roam. This semi-sedentary lifestyle was a precursor to full-blown agriculture. They became what archaeologists call affluent foragers. Life was good, but this abundance may have inadvertently set a trap. With a more reliable food source, populations began to grow. More mouths to feed meant more pressure on the local environment. The wild stands of grain that once seemed endless were now being depleted faster than they could naturally replenish. A crisis was looming. Do they move on, seeking new, untouched groves, or do they find a way to make the land they know produce more? This is where human ingenuity took center stage. People began to experiment. They noticed that seeds dropped on the ground would sprout into new plants. They learned which plants produced the biggest seeds and were easiest to harvest. Through a slow process of trial and error, they began to consciously select and plant these seeds. They weren't just gathering anymore, they were actively managing and shaping the plant life around them. They started clearing land, tilling the soil with simple tools made of bone and stone, and protecting their precious crops from pests and weeds. This was the birth of farming. It wasn't a sudden invention by a single genius, but a gradual evolution of practices over hundreds, perhaps thousands of years. Simultaneously, a similar process was happening with animals. Hunters had always followed herds of wild goats, sheep, and cattle. But instead of just hunting them, some groups began to manage them. They would drive herds into enclosures, selectively culling the aggressive animals and breeding the more docile ones. They learned to use them not just for meat, but for milk, wool, and eventually as beasts of burden to pull plows. This domestication of animals provided a stable source of protein and resources right on their doorstep. The wild wolf became the loyal dog, the wild auroch became the gentle cow. The relationship between humans and the animal kingdom was being fundamentally rewritten, so was it a choice or a necessity? The classic theory, often called the trap of sedentism, suggests it was more of a necessity. Growing populations and a changing climate pushed our ancestors into a corner. Farming was harder work than hunting and gathering. Early farmers had a less varied diet, were more susceptible to disease, and worked longer hours for their food. Skeletal remains from this period show evidence of malnutrition, dental problems from starchy diets, and arthritis from repetitive labor. It seems, from this perspective, that agriculture was a solution to a problem, a last resort to feed a growing population. They traded quality of life for quantity of food. But there's another, more compelling perspective that's gaining traction. Perhaps it wasn't just about survival. Perhaps it was also about culture, social status, and human ambition. In these growing, semi-sedentary communities, new social dynamics were emerging. Being able to produce a surplus of food, more than you needed for your immediate family, became a source of power and prestige. A successful farmer could host feasts, creating social bonds and obligations. He could trade his extra grain for other goods, like rare stones, shells, or finely crafted tools. This created the first stirrings of a new kind of society, one with hierarchies, specialists, and wealth inequality. Think about it. In a hunter-gatherer band, everyone is more or less equal. Possessions are limited to what you can carry. But with agriculture, the concept of private property is born. This field is my field. This harvest is my harvest. This created a powerful incentive to innovate and produce more. Farming wasn't just about feeding your family, it was about building a legacy, accumulating wealth, and gaining influence. In this view, the adoption of agriculture wasn't a desperate fall from grace, but a conscious, ambitious step towards a new kind of social complexity. It was driven by the same human desires for status and security that drive us today. The consequences of this shift were staggering and permanent. Once people settled down, they started building more substantial homes from mud, brick, and stone. Villages grew, and some, like Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey, became the world's first towns, housing thousands of people. With a surplus of food, not everyone had to be a farmer. People could specialize. Some became potters, creating vessels to store grain and water. Others became weavers, toolmakers, or builders, and a new class of people emerged, priests and leaders who organized labor, managed food stores, and mediated disputes. This specialization led to an explosion of technology and culture. The plow was invented, making farming more efficient. Irrigation systems were developed to bring water to dry lands. Pottery allowed for better cooking and storage. The wheel, invented first for pottery and later for transport, revolutionized trade and movement. And perhaps most importantly, the need to keep track of harvests, property, and trade led to the invention of writing. The story of civilization, of laws, literature, science, and empires is built upon the foundation laid by these first farmers. It simply couldn't have happened without the agricultural surplus, but this new world came with a dark side. The concentration of people in villages and towns, living in close proximity to their animals and waste, created ideal conditions for the spread of infectious diseases. Epidemics became a new and terrifying feature of human life. Competition over land and resources led to organized warfare on a scale never seen before. Walls were built around settlements, not just to keep out animals, but to keep out other people. Social hierarchies became entrenched, leading to systems of class and, eventually, slavery. The story of civilization is also a story of conflict, inequality, and disease. So when we look back at that pivotal moment 12,000 years ago, we see a complex picture. The transition to agriculture wasn't a simple story of progress. It was a trade-off. Our ancestors gave up the nomadic freedom and varied diet of their past for the security of a settled life and a steady food supply. They unleashed a cascade of innovations that would ultimately lead to the modern world, but they also unleashed new social ills that we are still grappling with today. They were driven by a mix of necessity, opportunity, and ambition. They were solving the problems of their time, unknowingly setting the course for the next 10,000 years of human history. The next time you eat a piece of bread or walk through a bustling city, take a moment to think about those first farmers. We are their direct descendants, living in the world they created. The fundamental question they faced, security versus freedom, community versus individuality, is a question that continues to echo through our own lives and our own society. The story of agriculture is not just ancient history, it is the story of who we are. Ever wondered what the very first song sounded like? I'm not talking about Beethoven or the Beatles or even the earliest recorded folk tunes. I'm talking about a sound so ancient it predates instruments, lyrics, and possibly even language itself. What if I told you that the first melody wasn't just a pleasant noise, but the very spark that ignited what it means to be human? Imagine a world without words, a world lit only by fire and stars. In this primal silence, our ancestors began to create sound, not by accident like the crash of a falling rock, but with intention. A rhythmic clap, a resonant hum, a call that rose and fell with a pattern. Somewhere in that ancient rhythm, in that first purposeful sound, something incredible was born. Scientists are now exploring a fascinating idea that the first songs weren't entertainment. They were tools for survival, blueprints for society, and the very cradle of our emotional world. Think about it. Before we could say, "I'm scared," maybe we could sing it. A low, trembling chant could communicate fear to the entire group, a warning that a predator was near. A rising, energetic rhythm could signal a successful hunt, a shared joy that rippled through the tribe. Music, in its purest form, is emotion made audible. It doesn't need translation. A baby will cry in a universal pitch, and a mother's lullaby, regardless of the language, soothes with its gentle rocking cadence. This is the raw power of sound. It bypasses the logical parts of our brain and speaks directly to our hearts. A direct line to our most primal feelings. This emotional contagion, the ability for one person's sung feeling to become the group's feeling, would have been a massive evolutionary advantage. It forged a bond, a sense of us, long before we had the words to describe it, but it goes deeper than just survival signals. Think about the act of making music together. When a group of people claps, chants, or sings in unison, something magical happens. Their heartbeats can actually synchronize. Their breathing falls into the same rhythm. Neurologically, their brains are lighting up in similar patterns. They are, for that moment, literally on the same wavelength. This isn't just a feel-good metaphor, it's a biological reality. For our early ancestors, this communal rhythm was the glue that held society together. It coordinated work, like pulling a large animal or grinding grain. It made ritual powerful and meaningful, uniting the group in a shared spiritual experience. Before laws, contracts, or constitutions, there was rhythm. There was the song that said, "We are one, we move together, we are a tribe." This unity, born from shared sound, was the foundation for the complex societies we live in today. So what did these first songs sound like? Of course, we can't know for sure. There are no recordings from 100,000 years ago, but we can find clues. We can look at the music of the most isolated indigenous cultures on Earth, cultures that have had minimal contact with the outside world. Their music often focuses heavily on rhythm and vocal chanting. We can also look at the way infants, before they learn language, communicate with their mothers. This motherese is a kind of song, full of exaggerated pitches and rhythms. It's not about the words, it's about the melody of connection. Scientists believe these modern examples might be echoes, auditory fossils, of how our ancestors first began to sing. They probably used their bodies as the first instruments, clapping, stomping, chest thumping, and their voices, exploring the range of sounds they could make. The songs were likely simple, repetitive, and deeply hypnotic. The goal wasn't to create a complex symphony, but to create a shared state of mind. This leads to an even more profound idea. What if music didn't just help us express emotions, but actually helped create them? The cognitive leap from a simple feeling like hunger or fear to a complex emotion like love, grief, or awe is huge. It requires a level of abstract thought. Music, with its ability to build tension and release, to tell a story without words, might have provided the mental framework for these complex feelings to develop. The arc of a melody, rising to a crescendo and then falling to a quiet resolve, mirrors the arc of a dramatic emotional experience. By singing about loss, perhaps we first learn to truly process grief. By singing about a heroic hunt, perhaps we first conceptualize courage. The song became a space where we could explore and understand the landscape of our own inner world. Music may have been the language of the soul before the mind even had words for it. This changes how we should think about the purpose of music. Today, we often see it as a product, a commodity. We stream it, we buy tickets to see it, we put it in the background while we work. But its origins suggest it's something far more fundamental. It's not just a human invention, it's part of the human instruction manual. It's a technology for connection, for emotion, for building worlds. When you get chills listening to a powerful piece of music, you're not just having a personal experience. You are plugging into an ancient circuit, a neural pathway carved out over hundreds of thousands of years, designed to unite you with the people around you and connect you to the deepest parts of your own humanity. That feeling of being part of something larger than yourself at a concert, that's not an accident. That's the original function of music, reawakening in a modern context. Even the structure of music itself seems to hold clues to the structure of our minds. The principles of harmony, tension, and resolution in music mirror the way we process information and narrative. We seek patterns, we anticipate what's next, and we feel a sense of satisfaction when our expectations are met, or a thrill when they're cleverly subverted. This call and response is fundamental to music, but it's also fundamental to conversation and storytelling. Could it be that the back and forth of a simple ancient chant was the training ground for the back and forth of language? It's a tantalizing possibility. The syntax of music may have laid the groundwork for the syntax of language. First, we sang our stories, then we spoke them. So the next time you put on your headphones or sing in the shower, take a moment. Remember that you are participating in one of the oldest and most essential human activities. You are tapping into the same force that allowed our ancestors to form tribes, to coordinate their actions, and to build the very concept of community. You are using a tool that helped shape the human heart and mind. The first songs weren't just a pleasant pastime in a harsh and unforgiving world. They were the key, they were the code that unlocked our ability to feel together, to work together, and to create meaning together. They were, in a very real sense, the beginning of who we are. The story of music isn't just the story of an art form, it's the story of us.